Yeah, I'll look at that as under my desktop here. Yeah,
Ooh,
eight by
that's
eight.
nice.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, so yeah, my idea for this was just a little catch up on Mac OS and iOS et al. Or and more, and yeah, to kind of just like talk about what that means, and we don't often talk about that Unix platform, but I know there are a lot of Mac OS users, probably a lot of iOS users. Uh, and yeah, I just want to chat about it. I know it's a little softer than some of our topics, but I think there's some interesting things about how companies do what they do and what we want them to do. So yeah, I just want to hear what other people think as well, because I think that's very interesting. But yeah, so yeah, look at that. Okay, yeah. So yeah, introduction and context here. Yeah, it is about that time, Techtober, or however you want to refer to it. There's lots of new updates from all sorts of companies, including Apple, and yeah, they just released a new iPhone with a new version of iOS, and as well as a new iPad and a few other things. And so that's kind of interesting. And there's also been some recent news about the App Store policy. I alluded to that in the abstract here. There's been some motion, and well, there is some movement, but it is still kind of hard to determine exactly what's going to happen. And well, I think that's something that we might discuss at length. And yeah, the maybe the larger topic here is this further transition into Apple Silicon and what that means for that platform or the others. So yeah, and yeah, to start with that, I want to start at the beginning just so we have like a frame of reference. Uh, and yeah, hopefully this isn't too boring for some of us, or hopefully I'm not going to gloss over too many details either. But yeah, of course, the yeah, that beautiful classic Macintosh design. Yeah, 1984, the original Mac, and classic Mac OS. It was a desktop computing revolution, etc. Uh, so yeah, that is like the original Macintosh, and that's like distinct from Apple's earlier computers, the Apple One and Apple Two, and the Lisa, which is something most people have never seen in person. But yeah, and the Macintosh is kind of based on both of those. They wanted to take it into a new friendly direction. The back of that had a place where you can grab it, so you can like pick it up off your desk. And it's practically, in a sense, a portable computer. And I think that context is kind of interesting in terms of the development of the platform, because yes, while we look at that and that's clearly a desktop computer, right? There's a keyboard and a mouse and a CRT, and yeah, it's a big, heavy desktop computer to us now. But it was, a portable desktop computer at that time, and it was pretty revolutionary for its time. Had only 128K of memory, and it had to do some interesting things to its architecture to really be able to perform well enough with that limit. Uh, Interestingly, that limit also is what led them to not have memory protection, basically for the entire lifetime of the classic Mac OS, which you may have seen or would imagine that that does become a problem later. And as well as a few other limits to that platform. But yeah, that was based on the Motorola 68K processors, and yeah, that was 80, yeah, 84. They started calling it Macintosh System Software in 87, rebranded it to Mac OS in 96 because they started licensing it to clones and things like that, and then killed that off and eventually released the last version of the classic Mac OS in '99. Looks like Sharon has something to add here.
Yes. What I
Yeah,
wanted to say, what was unique about this at that time was the bitmapped graphics. They were able to bitmap all the graphics to regular text and back and forth. That nobody else did at that time. They were the first ones to do it. And they were inspired by research from the Xerox Center to do that bitmaps graphics. So that Motorola 68K, they really taxed it a great deal. But that was one of its innovations here.
yeah, totally. Yeah, thanks for adding that. Was there someone from the board who also wanted to add something?
No, I accidentally hit the button, but I did
Oh,
want to say though that it was, I think it was the Lisa was like the first one that had the bitmap graphics. Then you had the Atari ST,
yeah,
and then the Macintosh right around the same time. Everyone was like right around in that sweet spot of releasing stuff. So yeah, it
yeah.
was an interesting period, and definitely a giant leap as far as, you know, from the previous generation of computing.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, it kind of shows, as maybe we see with other Apple products as well. Lisa was incredibly expensive, ahead of its time, perhaps. But yeah, so prohibitively expensive that that's why most people haven't ever seen one. But yeah, yeah, pretty interesting technology. Uh, Also interesting in this time. So this, yeah, like the period between the '80s and the '90s. And I'm sorry, my talk will go back and forth through time a little bit just because there's different interesting tidbits about hardware in different places. But yeah, in back in '88, so just a few years after this introduction, Apple actually had a Unix system called AUX. And you know, it started off as a CLI only way to have yeah, a Unix system on your Macintosh hardware, and then also perhaps run a Mac program. That got a lot better in the second and third version, and yeah, there was eventually basically that classic Mac OS GUI that was running on Unix and could open a terminal just like we now see today in OS 10, or Mac OS. And yeah, it's pretty interesting that it started that back then. You know, Apple has definitely, people might say they've struggled with the enterprise, but they have definitely always been interested in it to varying degrees, and you know, to varying degrees of success as well. But yeah, some interesting technology back then. Um, I believe AUX was based on yeah, the AT&T's Unix system, like V2.2, pretty old, but you know, had networking, you know, TCP/IP and Apple Talk, and eventually had NFS implementations. So that's pretty sturdy for a little Unix server of sorts. Um, so yeah, that's kind of interesting. Uh, I'm going to switch to the next slide. 2001, we have Mac OS 10 with the Roman numeral X, uh, and yeah, pronounced 10. This was a big revolution for this platform, right? As I mentioned, there were a variety of memory issues. Memory protection was not there, and virtual memory was not very good at the time. I think maybe towards the end they had something that kind of worked, but it was a bit troublesome. And yeah, so of course, some of us may know that actually not long after that first, I'm going to go back one, not long, a year after this was released, Steve Jobs left Apple, and not long after that started forming his company Next. This was a company that was producing hardware and software to work together, similarly, based on a Unix system from the beginning. And yeah, they had an interesting approach and definitely some famous uses. I believe Tim Berners-Lee created the internet on the Next Cube, or so the folklore goes. Of course, that doesn't make an internet on one computer doesn't make any sense. But it's an interesting hardware platform, and the World Wide Web. They created Next, and Next Step was the operating system that it ran, and that was based off this mock kernel and some stuff from FreeBSD. I have a couple other little details here, but yeah. So even then, that was based on the mock microkernel, and then they added some things to kind of make it a hybrid kernel. Through Next's struggles to get commercial success, they also started to support OpenStep, which was like a open source API spec for their UI and application platform, which is, I think, an interesting thing to point out, because we really start to see kind of a difference in the operating system versus the application libraries. I think it's kind of a relatable topic for most Linux users, of course. We all generally refer to Linux as a thing, but of course, Linux is just a kernel, and very few of us would work only with the kernel or directly even, and have a lot of other software between the kernel and ourselves. There's a whole lot of different things involved there. So similarly, we have this application framework, and that's pretty useful. There's even a GNU compatible or GPL version of that called GNU Step. You back in the day, you might put that on something as well. I'm sure some hobbyists are doing the same now. So that's what Jobs was doing, and for half the 80s and into the 90s, and then Apple famously kind of rehired Jobs, and then by acquiring Next, right? They acquired his company and that technology while they were looking for operating systems. And so they investigated a lot of different options, including BOS. And I think I've inspired Sharon as well.
Just a very small tidbit. The NEXT box, they used the microkernel called Mac, M-A-C-H, from Carnegie Mellon University. And of course, they added a lot of their own stuff to it. So it sort of lives on even today, buried somewhere inside there.
Yeah, absolutely. CMU, two developers basically created the original mock kernel. One of the guys, I forget his name, he ended up at Microsoft, and then the other guy ended up at Apple. The mock microkernel is a really interesting development in the academic kernel research that has led to a lot of changes for different corporations in terms of how they want to handle their software architecture. And so that was that. Let's see where I was. So we have Apple acquiring Next and deciding that, hey, we're going to try to integrate this as our next version of the Macintosh system. And they did. It took a little bit. It took some work, of course. With OpenStep, they created a system called Rhapsody, which was just for developer previews, and eventually made a server product, macOS 10 server, and that was pretty similar to what people saw in the macOS public beta right after that. Which had an Aqua GUI, which is kind of what we see here in this image. It's kind of the classic macOS Aqua interface with a dock and a menu bar. And it's a pretty interesting technology. PDF built into the core from the beginning. So, 2001, your default Mac applications were able to print to PDF without any like other software involved at all, right? That's built into the core with their Quartz technology. And that's pretty interesting and has, is still there. That is still definitely a large component of Mac OS. Yeah, and so in this time, yeah, they finally released Mac OS 10.0 Cheetah, and followed that up with a series of other cats that improved on Mac OS. They were definitely sore spots at the beginning as well. Didn't have DVD playing for like a version or two, and slowly built up till in 2007, the Leopard released, was certified under the single Unix specification v3. So that's the first time where they were like, okay, yes, not only is this POSIX compliant loosely, but it is like a certified Unix system. And, that kind of helps them in terms of developer support and networking. And then, in 2012, another release, Mountain Lion. They changed the name to just OS X for a little while, and then 2016 they updated again, and that's when we started just calling it Mac OS, and they started to use names of locations in California to give their OS versions a little bit of flavor. Of course, it's just marketing, but it is pretty interesting. They definitely like to add in a bunch of photos of that environment to kind of help market their operating system as well. But I think that's actually another interesting lesson that we see here, is that Apple has been practicing and improving at this methodology of getting users to get their security updates by enticing them with things that may be a lot less technically meaningful, but meaningful to them, whether that's a desktop background or a new emoji, or even just the ability to add, even the first iPhone didn't have a desktop background at all, right? They finally added that. And of course, you get huge adoption when users see those features that maybe don't really technically matter, but really impact their use. And so it's a great way to manage the other updates that you need users to get when you're managing your platform. In this transition, there was also, classic Mac OS still had so much software, right? Adobe's suite was still on classic Mac OS for a long time. And so Apple had to create basically a VM that would run any classic Mac OS software. And that's what they called it, classic mode. But then in OS 10, there were two APIs. You could use the older APIs, which they renamed to Carbon, as in like make your apps the same exact way. They'll still work. You don't even need the VM. And then they also said, but since we are now on this Unix system from Next, we have their application libraries, and they called that Cocoa. That was, of course, developers that jump on a brand new application framework right when they come out are brave souls indeed. Hopefully they're just experimenting and learning and testing things for a while at first. But that is a slow start, because you've got all of that, corporate momentum behind the old frameworks and then switching over to these new ones. Cocoa is comprised of like three primary things: the foundation kit, the app kit, and core data. Foundation is, that's where you have NS object, which is the next step object, which pretty much everything else in this object-oriented programming scheme derives from that. And then you have, the app kit for your UI, and core data that helps you handle persistent data. Those three things are still tantamount, like they are absolutely critical to the macOS platform. And that's how macOS apps are developed today still. Although there have been, of course, improvements and advancements. So, yeah. And then, of course, yeah, here in modern macOS, as I mentioned, and we changed the name to macOS. It was macOS 10 for a long time. And then just in 2020, they've decided to make the transition away from the 10 and the big X to macOS 11 with, that was with Big Sur. And so we kind of have some new UI and a lot of other features that came along with that. And we'll get to some of those features soon. So that's kind of like the Macintosh, right? That's how that computer evolved. Started as that one single desktop computer in the 80s. There were a bunch of different versions and clones into the 90s. And then, with the return of Steve Jobs and the Mac OS 10, we see kind of a simplification of the product line between laptops or portables and desktops. And then also the introduction of some new things. And the development of mobile computing. It actually started way back, in '84, like we saw with that classic, the first Macintosh computer. Well, that isn't really marketed as portable. It's just, has a handle for convenience. They were starting a portable system in '84. In fact, right around the same time, HP had launched their first luggable. Exactly. I have a couple of luggables sitting around for my personal museum. But yeah, HP had one that, was pretty much the first of its kind. Steve Jobs ended up trying to get that developer to start his own for the Macintosh, starting in '84. But in '85, Jobs' relationship with Apple exploded. And so when Jobs left, all the projects that he was pushing forward were killed. That same guy that was at HP and now at Apple continued to work towards a mobile platform of sorts. But, it was maybe, it's under different direction. It's got to be a really frustrating experience. I'm sure some of us have had similar experiences at work where you're going in one direction, then of course now corporate says, no, that's totally wrong direction. You got to go in a different direction now. But so that same guy, his name was Saccoman. I don't know his first name. Last name, Mr. Saccoman. He ended up just working on the Mac Plus and the Mac SE and the Mac 2. But then also got the ear of the CEO at the time, John Scully, and started selling this idea of a more portable platform. And they ended up doing a lot of research into that. They actually talked to AT&T about their AT&T had a line of processors called the Hobbit processors. And they were looking at using those for a portable tablet style computing device that could do handwriting recognition. And of course, since this was a bunch of engineers that were just proving what could be possible, the prices skyrocketed. They proved it could be possible if they used 3 of these processors in tandem. And of course, this is not going to be a functional solution. But the research was there. It was very interesting. Got a lot of people excited, and also kind of kickstarted the development of the Newton as a platform. So Apple made the Macintosh Portable, which was their first luggable laptop. Nothing too special there. That was a 68K processor, just like the original Macintosh. Of course, you got to plug that right into 120 volts. Otherwise, you're not going anywhere. And yeah, probably that one was probably like 20 pounds or so. Very heavy, not very efficient. But yeah, in the 80s, Acorn computers were testing out their Acorn RISC machines and created the ARM platform. Apple was not long after that kind of discovered them for themselves and invested heavily. And that's when Acorn spun off ARM to its own system. And so Apple started looking at those chips to be much, much more efficient to work in a mobile platform. And that's what they used for the message pad, the Newton. Started development in like 86, 87, finally had a product in 93. This is essentially one of the first mass market PDAs. There's a lot of fine print depending on what PDA was released when, but yeah, very early ARM processor PDA. And yeah, so they developed that, and some success, not very wide success. That platform only lasted into like 97 or so, which is about when Palm jumped in, I think actually 96, and they had their own system as well. That got pretty popular, of course. Many of us remember that. But it's interesting to see how close these companies were in developing things together. Yes, RIP Palm for sure. I still actually have a Palm Pre, one of those last smartphones that they made. Yeah, Palm was a really cool company. They did some cool stuff, but yeah, the message pad and the Newton in general were some interesting mobile devices. And then, of course, when we think about mobile computing, around that same time, not long after, really, the iPod hits the scene. And in an interesting way, yeah, it is a totally different platform. It was not a fork of macOS or anything like that at the time. It is ARM hardware, and it is, the platform is essentially an embedded system, right? There is not a multitasking user environment. It is just hardware that has a UI, and it worked really well. Of course, at first, the development or the acceptance of the product started off a little slowly. They definitely had some work to do to make it affordable, make it more interesting for more people. But of course, most of us know that story. After a couple of years, it took off like a rocket. And yeah, that is the ARM CPU there, Till. The first iPod had ARM 7, the TDMI chip. Yeah, incredibly efficient. That's why I can run on a little battery. And at that time, maybe those batteries were quite large and only lasted a few hours, but that's leaps ahead of anything else at the time. So that's pretty interesting. So yeah, we've got that kind of progress there. And then, of course, in 2007, the iPhone. And yeah, I got a quote here that I believe is a Steve Jobs quote. It's been requoted a million times. So when they approach this, they're like, yeah, we need, everybody was like, hey, I love the iPod, and I also love my my Nokia, and how do I get this to be one, right? I want just one device to do everything. And yeah, of course, they saw this opportunity, and they saw it as two possibilities. You could either shrink the Mac, right? Make the Mac smaller, lighter, somehow, an epic feat of engineering, or make the iPod bigger and more capable, right? You could either go one way or the other. You could start with a big computing platform and try to shrink it into something small, or start with this embedded platform and try to grow it into something larger. it's been in a few books now since some time has passed. But yeah, it's apparently they set up two different teams to try these two different strategies. These teams were led by, I know Scott Forstall was the Make the Mac Small team, and man, I'm not gonna forget this other guy's name. I think it's a Tony. Yes, Tony Fidel, who I think ended up working for Microsoft later. He probably did the Zoom or something. Uh, he was trying to make the iPod a bigger, more capable platform, such as like so that it could be an iPhone. And to everyone's surprise, the Mac, shrinking the Mac is the platform that worked. That made more sense because of that technology, of that small kernel, microkernel. It's actually a hybrid at this point, but that kernel, super portable and easy to work with. They could add their software stacks to it however they needed. That was the solution. At that time, they're using. They might have even used an OMAP processor for a minute from TI, but then also definitely had some Samsung chips in the very beginning. But that's how they made it work. Oh, yes, that's right. Tony went to Nest. Excellent. Thank you, Harold. Yes. So, definitely Tony, yeah, Tony invented the iPod. And so that's why he led that team. And I'm sure he did a great job. But yeah, Scott Forstall was able to get XMU, or the Darwin kernel, onto this hardware, and make a UI that people could develop on. And yeah, so in essence, iOS right here, or originally called iPhone OS, is a fork of macOS. It is a fork of the very small core. And well, actually, the top stuff is really just the same thing, but altered for that interface to make sense for that device. They took the same NSObject foundation and AppKit, and then made a new one called Cocoa Touch, right? It's just like Cocoa, but this is Cocoa Touch. It's the same thing, but made for touch devices. And that grew and built in, now they call it UI Kit, but that's basically the same thing. It is a fork of Cocoa for touch devices. And that took off really well. Yeah, and that's interesting that I think right there, as we see like the first step in this bifurcation that is, well, interestingly, people wonder about what the future of the operating systems are. And I think that, I think we're already living in the future. So that's what we've got right now. After the iPhone, there's an explosion of other devices. We have an iPod Touch, just in case you don't need a cell modem, or for kids or whomever. The Apple TV, the iPad. When the iPad's introduced, that's when they officially switched the name to iOS instead of iPhone OS. So they have so many other devices. The Apple TV runs another fork of iOS. The iPad is basically a fork of iOS. Apple Watch is introduced in 2015. That is another fork of iOS. And the HomePod is a fork of the tvOS. So in a way, they've created these families of products that are all based on the same core technology, but then have the useful parts that make sense for their application only for them, right? A smart TV box doesn't need it doesn't need a cellular modem at the time. Maybe eventually it will, but it doesn't need to have those facilities. So you maybe remove those as an example. And of course, many other things. It's like, well, if you have a small screen, you need something just for that, just like the Apple Watch there. So yeah, that's Mac OS getting turned into iOS, getting turned into tvOS, iPad OS. And even another one that we see later here in the Intel Mac. So while all those small devices are coming out, Apple's running into the limits of PowerPC architecture. After the 68K, not long after the, actually before the OS 10 transition, there was a transition to PowerPC from the 68K. PowerPC is an IBM architecture. It's very powerful. They made incredibly powerful computers at the time that were also very power hungry. IBM, had lots of customers for PowerPC, including, I believe, the PS3. Is it the PS2? I can't remember, but yeah, it's a pretty popular CPU architecture and very powerful, incredibly powerful, just very power hungry. Apple realized that that wasn't compatible with their vision. Harold, you got something? Go ahead.
Hi. I would call the PowerPC product of they called it the AIM Alliance, Apple, IBM, and Motorola. Like you said, the IBM wanted maximum power, maximum, computing power at the cost of, who cares how much electricity you're using. Motorola wanted to use PowerPC in their smaller, even cell phone type devices. And Apple was like, why not both? So the platform kind of got pulled in two different directions, and it didn't really go anywhere as a result.
Yeah, absolutely. That's spot on. And you could see from Apple's perspective, you've got a big partner like IBM making your powerful servers, and you've got the other partner, Motorola, trying to make something power efficient for smaller devices. You're like, well, clearly that's a great architecture if it can be used for both. And it was. PowerPC is amazing. Still some of my favorite Macs, and many other people's favorite Macs are PowerPC. Some really cool stuff at the time. Open firmware is a technology they used at that time, which is super awesome and interesting for some of us at least. Apple did eventually see that is incompatible with their vision because of that thermal requirement. Not only just sucking up the juice, but also the amount of heat it kicked out. It's just not acceptable for the devices that they were planning. And PowerPC, I've heard that from a lot of people on a really low level. The instruction set was really nice to work with, whereas x86 has just been, layer after layer of additional architecture additions. And that's probably what contributes to most of that trouble there. Not sure, but so Apple wants to start a transition to a new CPU architecture. And we've also seen publications at that time. They were also considering Spark, and in fact had macOS 10 running on Spark, which would have been amazing. But of course, at that time, Intel was doing really great. Core 2 Duo was just about to come out, so it's like perfect timing. It's like high efficiency multi-core processing. That's exactly what Apple was looking for. And you get the added benefit of being on this commodity architecture a bunch of your users want to put Windows on this hardware. Well, that's going to work now. And so that's a pretty good benefit and a good opportunity. And Apple then made a ton of awesome Intel Macs. The first one was like an iMac, and that came with a TPM because Intel is a big fan of that technology. That was just on the 2006 iMac. It was never really used and disappeared from Macs after that forever. So that's kind of interesting. Apple did not care for that version of the technology. In the Intel lineup of Macs, especially the laptops, they were already approaching this level where they were very dear to a lot of power user admins and developers. And the Intel transition kicked it out of the park. The unibody hardware made their laptops feel like solid rocks. It's amazing. Retina screens. made their already beautiful screens far better than anything else. And then also starting to adopt Thunderbolt and faster I/O technology. Apple's always been, kind of the black sheep in I/O technology. They definitely had some, weird proprietary stuff that nobody else had ever seen before. And then eventually, they adopted USB really quickly. It was basically one of the reasons they were able to get rid of the floppy drive. It's because you've got USB. Why would you need a built-in floppy drive? And then, they started developing Thunderbolt with Intel, and the first couple generations were really good for like DisplayPort technology. And then, of course, in 2016, we see Thunderbolt 3 and USB-C. That same generation, we also saw a touch bar added to a few of the Mac laptops. It's not a big feature for a lot of people. Some people hate it. Some people are completely ambivalent. Some people like it a little bit. But it's an interesting addition to the architecture because it's actually also enabled Touch ID, which is authentication technology that they had on the phones, brought to a laptop, which is very convenient for scanning your fingerprint. But to run that and the touch bar strip screen, I should have had a picture of that on here. They actually added an additional CPU, the T1, which was based on the S2. I know these names are not very meaningful. The S2 is like the second or third Apple Watch chip. I actually like my touch bar too, Ryan. I'm glad to see this. Some other people do. I can never stand old function keys. I don't know what the default state is. Do I need the hold down function to get one thing, or do I get the other thing? Anyway, I think touch bars are cool. When they added it, they added a CPU. They added an extra CPU. And it was based on the silicon that they were using in the watch at the time. And just barely able to run the display of the touch bar. And the virtual escape key, which absolutely was terrible. Now that my current one has a hard escape key, I'm a fan. I think that's great as long as I have an escape key. But so the 2016 MacBook Pro had a T1. They called it a T1 for their touch bar that also had a secure enclave. And that is, where we see Apple kind of doing their own security mechanism in silicon, where they have, you have a root key that is fused into that chip during manufacturing and is isolated from the rest of the system. That's why it is on essentially another computer, so that it can be completely isolated while literally embedded into the same machine. The second generation of that, which I think, don't remember exactly which chips that's in, it was actually based on the A10, the same chip that was in the phones. And so, you're seeing that, like, that secondary CPU that's just running this tiny little OLED strip is now the same as was in an iPhone a few years ago, and very capable. That's a pretty interesting development. Definitely allowed them to have that nice security feature and do a couple other things. They've also offloaded some video processing onto that because, those phone chips have to be really fast and efficient at video. And Intel's chips didn't necessarily keep up with the codecs. So whenever Apple can, they pass that off to the other CPU that's got the hardware for that codec that makes that super efficient. And so, we have like an Intel CPU passing off, video codec load to some custom Apple silicon. Intel's use in Macintosh computers, it's been, I guess that's 14 years or so, give or take. And it's been pretty awesome. They've made a lot of powerful computers. The one that's on the screen is the Imac Pro, which is an interesting computer, basically developed because the little trash can that they did was thermally insufficient for upgrades. And so they did this to kind of appease people temporarily, and it is a gorgeous computer and incredibly fast. But yeah, some really good computers, some difficult choices. The keyboards on those 2016 MacBook Pros are terrible, but they finally eventually fixed that. And of course, that's not related to Intel at all. It's just Apple moving in 5 different directions at once with all of their platforms. And yeah, sometimes some decisions are maybe better than others. But yeah, we've seen this with Intel. We see this now with Intel, just like we saw with PowerPC. Is they were, well, of course, we know that nobody's doing over 4 gigahertz in a laptop consistently. And yeah, you go any faster than that, and your electrons are flying off the silicon. So it doesn't make sense to scale that way. What you need to do is you need to scale down. You need smaller process nodes so you can get more efficient chips that can run faster, more efficiently. And Intel was struggling to do that. Intel definitely continued to put out new CPUs and definitely did what they can to make high performance CPUs for most of their customers. But yeah, the gaming market is huge. You don't even need Intel's fastest processors to do that. You get an i5 and a really big GPU, and you're off to the races. But yeah, Apple wanted more. They wanted more efficiency, and yeah, just what they were able to do with the phone showed them that, well, maybe they need to consider something else. Could they look at the hypotheticals? Could they run it on their own? Well, yeah, they definitely can and did and do. I am actually running this on Apple Silicon right now as well. In 2020, Apple announced the new transition to their own silicon, branding Apple Silicon, starting at a 5 nanometer process. This original M1 chip is based on the A14, which was, the CPU that was in the iPhone 12, no, 11, one of those, a recent iPhone, right? And you're like, wow, just a chip in an iPhone. Well, the geek benchmarks really kind of show that it kills it. And indeed, it can run macOS like a champion. It is incredibly fast. Has a neural engine there to assist with on-device machine learning and not just uploading everything to the cloud. Of course, your media codecs optimized as much as possible. Thunderbolt 3 with USB 4 support, super big. And a GPU built right into the die, of course, to make that extra fast. That secure enclave that we mentioned before that was on a separate chip is now just built into that single Apple Silicon chip. And they even add their own image signal processing. And well, that's the thing with Apple, is they will just, now that they can control that, they will add whatever features they want that they can take advantage, because they have that like a vertical monopoly in their platform, where they can say, hey, yeah, we need this down here, so we can put this right above it so that we can deliver this awesome feature on top of all of that to our customers. And how do we do that? We do that by controlling that whole process. And yeah, it's pretty amazing performance. Single core performance on this M1 is pretty amazing. And the multi-core performance is pretty good as well. It is definitely their first chip that is meant for the largest amount of computers. I think is probably the best way to look at that, is the computers that are going to sell the most, which are like the small and medium laptops, as well as the new iPad. They threw that in the new iPad. So it's makes you wonder, what is the difference between a Mac and an iPad now? And well, yeah, it's pretty ambiguous. I think it always was pretty ambiguous, but now the users have those features that show them how ambiguous it is. The Apple Silicon also allows any of the iOS and iPad OS apps to run directly on macOS. So all they need to do is include those application libraries that were made for that platform, and yeah, then those applications work automatically, and it's pretty amazing. Now, of course, those applications were built for a different platform because of that user interface. Whether it's the input or the output, it's optimized for that experience. And so maybe it's not going to be perfect on a different platform, but it's going to run, and maybe it's going to do what you want. Of course, Apple has also added some technologies that assist with that as well. Thinking about macOS, some new and recent features specifically to macOS, which are kind of interesting. I think this is kind of my nerd service slide here. I think a lot of us like file systems and want really good file systems and not all the really bad file systems. And yeah, APFS is pretty awesome. You know, maybe not as awesome as ZFS. You know, you can make your comparisons, or if you have your favorite, maybe yours is a little bit better. But wow, APFS is really awesome. Abandoning the master boot record for GPT. Yeah, and I love ZFS too. Believe me, I was kind of hoping that Apple would have just adopted ZFS. I think this is good enough, and I'm happy with it. Clones of a whole disk where you're only storing the delta, read-only snapshots, 64-bit inodes, data integrity checkzones, crash protection, compression, space sharing. This file system is pretty amazing. When you get a new disk, it gives you the full storage. The compression on it is incredible. Of course, full disk encryption as well on there. And yeah, you can have multiple partitions that share the same space. You can limit one and not the other. Of course, you know, they're not inventing infinite hard drive space. You will run out of space eventually, but it is incredibly performant at sharing that space among different disks. And yeah, part of that adoption was to move the operating system on the Mac disk to its own read-only system partition. That is a big advancement in Apple's security as they see it. And yeah, I think it's pretty amazing. Why would I ever want my operating system to be writable other than by the person who is signing my operating system? Now, I think this is definitely where we get to, well, I don't want someone telling me what stuff I have to run. Of course, yeah, I think there's a lot of room for that, particularly in all my servers. I love Linux servers. They're amazing, particularly because I can set them up how exactly I want. There's always an answer below every problem, and we can always solve it somehow. But you know, that comes with the complexity. Many of you know, working with Linux on a workstation can have some issues every now and then. And yeah, I think that, you know, it's an interesting trade-off that we have here, where, you know, it depends on what you want to do. I think whether you want a read-only signed partition, or do you want to be able to do whatever you want to your system? And yeah, doing whatever you want is really, really great, of course. But maybe it's not necessary all the time, and maybe you want the advantages of having that secure system. Some of these other recent and upcoming features to macOS, upcoming I say because the newest version of macOS, macOS 12, nicknamed Manitoba? No, I'm getting that wrong. That's Canada. Monterey. That's right. macOS Monterey is coming out, looks like next week, actually. We'll get to that. But there are some new features that probably won't even ship quite yet. But dark mode is about 2 versions old. Version or 2 ago, they replaced Bash with ZSH, which is pretty great. A lot of macOS users were using ZSH anyway. but I'm a big fan of good defaults. So this is a better default. That's great. Control Center, it's a lot like an iPhone Control Center, but on your Mac. Password management built into the system preferences. So you, just like your LastPass or 1Password, built right in with two-factor authentication as well. Screen time, if you want to be able to track what you or your kids are doing on a computer. Focus modes are like basically an abstraction of do not disturb. So if you like being able to put your device in do not disturb, but wish you had more control over how disturbed you might get, focus modes is all about that. You can create arbitrary modes where you allow different notifications for whatever setting you want. Shortcuts is an automation platform that started on iOS. It was actually a third-party developer. Apple bought them up, integrated it into iOS, and now has brought it to macOS. This kind of has the aim of replacing another automation system on macOS, Automator, which is incredibly powerful, which, yeah, lots of users do drag and drop configurations of an automation workflow. So if they drop the files here, it splits them up and renames them and moves them and lets somebody else know all about it, that kind of thing. That is on macOS as well now. Could do pretty much the same thing with Automator, but Shortcuts is a bit nicer interface. Both of them are incredibly powerful. You can trigger arbitrary shell scripts as well. So you're not really like locked into this GUI, like, oh, I need the right puzzle piece for that. One of those puzzle pieces is the do anything you want puzzle piece. And at least a few of them are actually. But yeah, that's pretty great. Sidecars, you can use your iPad as a second screen to your Mac, which is pretty nice. I've used that a few times. My iPad is a little small for a second screen, but if you're traveling with a laptop and an iPad and you want to be able to use two screens at once, that's pretty convenient. Got a new one, Universal Control. It's not shipping quite yet, but that looks really cool. Similar to Sidecar, but instead of your iPad having a Mac screen, it stays there, but now your cursor can switch over to your iPad and you can drag and drop things between them if you want. So that's pretty interesting. SharePlay is on their messages and FaceTime network and will allow you to basically share an app experience, whether that's Netflix or some other video or audio app, probably even like Spotify. I know that an indie developer that I follow that makes a dice app is going to be adding that as well. So yeah, if you're like playing your tabletop RPG and rolling virtual dice, you can actually see the same virtual dice at the same exact time, that kind of thing. Siri, of course, everybody's probably hated Siri at one point in their life. I actually find it pretty useful every now and then, but yeah, of course, that's there. iCloud Drive, the Mac App Store. Mac App Store is really interesting. It's a lot like the iOS App Store, but of course, the Mac, you can still get stuff from elsewhere. But it's nice to have a good authenticated experience where Apple says, yep, all this is really great and we recommend it. And that's definitely one of those areas where I love to be able to say to a family member, yeah, don't worry about it. If you can go to the Mac App Store, download any apps you want there. They're all perfectly fine. Of course, there's a chance that some of them are not going to be, but wow, that chance is a lot lower than if you said that anywhere else. And I think that's the way that I like to be able to help my family, is to have guides that also protect them. Yeah, so that's pretty interesting. Boom, Apple services. Yeah. So in addition to like Mac OS and all the advancements there, Apple, now that they are super giant, of course, is under market pressure to become a services company because our economy believes in infinite growth. They are finding a new way to grow. And actually doing a pretty great job of it. They have their own credit card now, which is pretty amazing, built into the phone, of course, actually built into your Mac as well. If you allow that, you can just, Touch ID on your Mac to buy things, even on third-party websites that implement the standard API for that. It's pretty awesome. They have so many other services now that they've bundled into a one service collection, which is kind of hilarious. But yeah, Apple Music, just like Spotify, Apple TV, just like Netflix, Apple Arcade, just like, kind of like something like Stadia, but actually Apple Arcade is like you download the games. I play them locally for a subscription. Apple News, Apple Fitness, more iCloud stuff. A couple other features in there. HomeKit Secure Video is one that I really like. You can get some pretty nice little Logitech cameras, and you set them up. You do like a hard reset holding down the I don't want Logitech software button, and it flashes it with Apple software, and that your videos are uploaded to a special part of your iCloud as long as you have some iCloud space. It allows you to keep up to like 2 weeks of video there for your home security needs. It's pretty interesting. Yeah. They've also recently started doing some other services, kind of approaching a VPN service, with hide my email and private relay stuff. So they will, allow you to have fake email addresses you can distribute. And also, their private relay is a 2-point VPN system. So you VPN, you tunnel into Apple, and then from there, Apple tunnels you into a third party, after which you finally get to your DNS provided destination. And through that obfuscation, really provides some extra security. That's a brand new service. It's hard to tell how well it's going to work out, but it looks pretty interesting. Yeah, and also they do a lot of family sharing stuff. I know that I've got a family plan set up so that my mom's on it, my wife's on it. We all share storage. We share the same apps. So if I buy them, they get them. And there's there's a limit of that, of course, but it's pretty reasonable and pretty flexible. It's impressive. So yeah, of course they've just invented more ways for you to spend money, which I'm sure a lot of us are not really interested in. But I think it's interesting that this company that has revolutionized personal computing hardware, particularly with a controlled, secure platform, has grown so much and has achieved this ridiculous, miraculous success that you can't even consider them a computer company practically anymore. They are mostly a phone company, and then also happen to sell the only computers that can program for their phones, at least natively. And it's interesting, that they have now been pushed to do something else. And I suspect that that's largely due to market forces and boards of directors and things like that. So we'll see how this goes. I think that's very interesting. iOS also has new features. I kind of threw this slide in. Same web extensions that work on Safari now work on iOS. Live text is really cool. I know Android users have had pretty similar stuff for a little while now. Works really well on iOS. You can highlight text in a picture and it gives you the text, and you can instantly look it up or copy and paste it somewhere else, that kind of thing. Those focus modes. Widgets, again, Android has been using widgets for a long time. Apple has finally decided on how they want to implement that kind of thing, and it works pretty well. They could probably use some improvements as well, but And then multitasking on iOS, in particular iPad OS, has been improved, and it's pretty great, easy to use now, I think, at least. In the vein of iOS features, and this is also kind of a macOS thing, because a lot of these features are really kind of in both places at once. And that's what we saw with this recent update, is that most of the updates that they brought to one platform, they brought to the others. We have these new technologies, Catalyst and Swift UI. They're really interesting. Catalyst is how a developer can take their existing iPad app and click a checkbox and compile it for macOS on Intel even. And that's a pretty awesome technology. And then they have a new framework called Swift UI, which is similar in results or theoretical results to AppKit and UIKit, the primary user interface software development kits for the Macintosh and iOS. Now as a more reactive framework that allows you to do kind of declarative programming and simplifies the ability to make interfaces across multiple devices, especially different screen sizes. I think that's pretty significant there. Apple has been doing a lot of work because, yeah, that's difficult. As you'll see, if anyone's an iOS developer here, or if you know one, you'll see that they might be pulling out their hair with all the different screen sizes. Of course, it's nothing compared to the amount of Android screen sizes, but seems like Android has a more laissez-faire methodology to that. But yeah, it's interesting that these library kits kind of just really allow you to do new things with that platform that they've been building from the beginning, right? And now they're just trying to make it more flexible. Well, if you wrote your application for one platform, how easily can we get you to put it on another platform? Which is a big important question for Apple, since they have an insane amount of users on one of their platforms and dramatically less on another. So yeah, we'll see how that works out. Looks like it's working pretty well, but of course, every road's a little bumpy every now and then. The iOS App Store, I mentioned we should talk about that. And we're already kind of running a little late here, maybe. But yeah, you probably have heard that Apple has been in litigation with Epic Games over their kiddie casino, action game Fortnite. And it's been pretty interesting. Apple has a lot of strict policies about how the iOS App Store works. Of course, they will deny your ability to distribute games through the App Store or any other application if it doesn't fit their strict requirements. And one of those is that in-app purchases need to go through their system and therefore also be taxed. Apple gets a cut of that. It's 30%. And that's a pretty big cut. Of course, for a company like Epic Games using Fortnite, that's millions of dollars, because their game is so big and popular that it's worth a lot of money to them. It's worth so much that they're willing to hire a team of lawyers to try to make that money. And there has been a ruling in that. The judge says that Apple's going to have to do something to help, but also made it pretty clear that some of the things that Epic wanted are not going to be something that they can demand. So that is still up in the air. There's probably appeals going to be happening, and we'll see what Apple actually puts forward as a solution that the judge essentially requested them to produce. But it's very interesting. Since I mentioned the 30% right there, that is, Apple defends that as that's the same thing that Xbox takes. It's the same thing that Sony takes. Those companies, that's the game console market, and a mobile device is, theoretically a restricted platform, so that we can guarantee some sort of security, and perhaps very similar to a game console, but it definitely fills a lot of general purpose uses. And so in a lot of ways, it is a very general purpose computing platform, and hard to distinguish from their other general purpose computing platforms. So that's very interesting. And, it's, in our system here, of course, when the attorneys and the accountants are involved, as they always are with amounts of money this large, things get settled in or near a court. And well, it's an interesting way to settle technical problems. Yeah, the Japan Fair Trade Commission also recently announced that they were going to require Apple to not charge that. I believe it's not charged 30% on reader applications, which includes even things like Spotify or Amazon Music. Reader here is a really wide, broad term, but it's also a term that gets wider and wider all the time. And so that's a really interesting poke in the armor here that we may see a lot of other changes. Apple is also litigating against a class action group of US developers over a few things. Apple didn't even want you to tell customers that they can go somewhere else to get your tokens or other things like that. And it looks like some of that is going to change, but not a whole lot in that regard. But we'll see. Again, Apple has announced some immediate changes, but really, I think the next year or two is where we are going to see how those changes really play out in the marketplace. What's next? Apple today just announced an event next week. Is very likely going to be the announcement of when the newest version of macOS is going to be released, and probably along with some hardware. Of course, no one really knows these things. It could be something else. It could be just to say hi, but there's a lot of hardware that is anticipated. Some people even think AR equipment is, in the pipeline, ready to be at least maybe released for a developer preview, something like that. That could be interesting. Again, of course, with Apple Silicon. And yeah, there is no speculation like Apple event speculation. It is a unique kind of thing. Very interesting. People will dig into all sorts of hidden meanings that they think they see. But yeah, well, I might speculate a little bit. I've speculated with some friends privately or the board members here. So we actually have in this graphic a block diagram that is not an engineering document, right? This has no real physical interpretation, but is a logical diagram of sorts of the components of their CPUs, the high performance cores, the efficiency cores, the GPU, the image signal processing, and the neural net. And this M1 in the top corner is what Apple showed at one of their talks about, this is the M1. This is that, their first hot new Apple Silicon chip. And it's, the single thread Geekbench performance score is like over 6K, I think. Sometimes I get those numbers mixed up. It's incredible. And we think that, they are working on some new chip designs that are probably going to be coming out in the next week or month or two that are much larger and much more powerful still. These diagrams are kind of just to maybe help give you an idea of what they're doing in here. Yeah, this M1 had, I believe that's 8 GPU cores that there are, going to turn into either 16 or 32 GPU cores. And the CPU cores, it looks like we're going to be looking at 8 and 2. Because of course you don't need too many high efficiency cores, but you might want a lot of those high performance cores depending on your workload. But yeah, honestly, the speculation here is kind of wild because part of it is, well, what can you fit on a CPU die? Of course, some CPU dies get quite large, but that's a totally different manufacturing process as well. So it'll be interesting to see what they do here. It's hard to imagine that it's going to be very disappointing, but I guess that depends on your expectations. So yeah, I think that's kind of interesting. Yeah, and yeah, that's the end. yeah, I did not know how long this was going to take. It looks like it took me a little over an hour. Does anybody have anything they want to ask about or chat about?
Feel free to raise your hand if you do. Jim, yes.
Yeah, I've got the first version of the MacBook Air with the M1. It's just I bought one just because I needed a laptop. I knew it wasn't going to be my development machine, so it's only got 8 gigs of RAM. But that thing just flies. And it's got like 18 hours of battery life. It's an insane little laptop. I just love the thing. I'm looking forward to a much bigger, beefier MacBook Pro. So I'm interested in this event next Tuesday. I'm hoping for something with at least 32 gigs of RAM, hopefully 64. But one thing I wanted to mention is VMware just announced their open beta for VMware for the M1.
Nice.
Just like last week, and so it's free, which is great. I've been a VMware customer user since the 90s when they came out with their very first version for Intel. But I grabbed the free beta, put it on my M1, and I loaded the ARM version of Ubuntu, and it installed fast, and it boots incredibly fast. It runs fast. I've seen it's a beta product, but I've seen no problem at all with it. It's just a really nice little package. But the funny thing is, people are pissed that they can't run Intel code in a VM, and they're screaming at VMware about this. And it's not VMware's fault. They think VMware should provide an emulator for x86 instructions on an M1 chip, and that's not VMware's job. They're a hypervisor, not an emulator.
Well, and this gets back to Code Weavers, where they were talking about Wine and getting that running on an M1 Macintosh, and they've been doing a lot of that effort as well.
Yeah, they've had some real success with that.
Yeah, which has been pretty amazing.
Well, Apple's got Rosetta 2 now, I think, where you can run Intel apps on an M1 chip, which is great, and it works. I've done some of those, and it works very, very well. But you can't run an operating system in a VM through Rosetta. It's just not possible, and I don't expect it to be possible. There's an operating system. The kernel of the operating system is expecting CPU things. It's expecting registers and interrupts and all that kind of stuff. And when you switch out the Intel for an M1, all of that changes.
Yeah, and I think that's really interesting. I think maybe Apple could be, if they were sufficiently motivated, they could probably extend Rosetta into emulation for an operating system as well.
Maybe,
but
is that where they want to spend their time?
Seems like it. Yeah, exactly. And it's like, well, why? Well, because they don't really see. It seems like they don't see x86 as a viable platform. And when asked directly about running Windows, they were like, well, yeah, Windows runs on ARM, so there's no reason it shouldn't. Microsoft, you like running on ARM, right? And I think so far it has been pretty much a hard no on that, but I think that's still just a matter of time, because Microsoft is deeply invested into mobile platforms and ARM computing in particular. So that'll be interesting.
And VMware says you can run Windows, the ARM version of Windows, in their VMware, but licensing is kind of tricky because the way Microsoft licensed their ARM version. I guess you, as a user right now, you can't really get your hands on the ARM Windows, but technically it does work.
Does Apple have any plans at all to just sell the M1 chip for other people to build things on it?
I've not heard of anything.
Yeah, it doesn't look like it, and it seems pretty unlikely from the speculation that I've heard. It's because that's I mean, it is an impressive chip that they could probably sell for a good amount of money, but they're not really desperate for money. And it is nice to have that technology that kind of sets them apart.
It's their competitive advantage right now.
Folks, we do have a couple questions. So Richard Jackson, you have your hand up. Please go ahead. Richard, do you have your hand up?
Is he muted?
I'm not sure. Okay. Well, let's move over to Ryan. Ryan, you have a question. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Richard. Go ahead.
Yeah. Did you, by any chance, I got to the meeting kind of late. Did you talk about BlackBerry at all?
I did not utter those words. But yeah, they're relevant at a certain point in time. They used ARM and definitely had some cool keyboards.
Right. The reason I wanted to mention that is I don't want to brag, but somebody I used to work with when I worked at NBD, he actually lived in Windsor. His son was one of the co-founders of BlackBerry.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, Ryan, did you have something you wanted to chat about?
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Jim and Justin, I think you guys actually kind of answered my original question, which was whether or not Apple actually put out anything to kind of help ease the transition for people who are still running a bunch of like non-ARM apps and stuff that wasn't compatible with ARM. But I guess for those of us who have done that, if anyone's tried that, like, I'm just kind of curious, like, what is the performance like when you're kind of running in that kind of an environment on the M1 chip?
Yeah, for sure. I can actually speak to a little bit at least, and then I can open it up to anyone else. Yeah, I am running an M1 actually on my daily driver for development. I do web development, full stack, and primarily in Python. So that makes that pretty easy. But yeah, there are a few circumstances, and in particular at the beginning, my IDE was not compiled for Apple Silicon. And so, yeah, I think generally what you see with Rosetta 2, which does that Intel emulation there, is that the initial startup for that application will take a little bit longer as Rosetta takes that binary and completely translates it, and then stores that translated binary and then runs that incredibly fast all the time.
Yeah, it's not an emulator.
Really, yeah, it's not really an emulator. It's translating it once and then running that translation. And it's, yeah, it's really impressive, actually.
Wow, that's pretty slick. Yeah, cool.
Yeah, I mean, of course, your mileage may vary depending on what kind of application, but yeah.
And the cool. Big apps, the big apps are available for the M1 architecture now. Initially, I ran the Intel version of Chrome, and that worked. I didn't really notice any performance issues because the chip is so fast. The chip is like something like 1.6 times faster than the Intel chip. So any lag in Rosetta, I think, was erased by the speed improvement of the chip. But then, Google came out with a M1 version of Chrome, and pretty much every app I use, which isn't a lot, they're all M1 versions now. Yeah, I use the JetBrains IDEs. I'm a big fan of all of their IDEs, really, because they're all basically the same. And yeah, at first they didn't, but now they have Apple Silicon versions of everything that I touch in their system, at least, and they run great.
Are there any other questions?
Could I just mention that there was discussion a little bit about VMware and some product there. So if there's, we're saying we don't have any topics for the coming months. It sounds like that might have been something interesting to talk about. Thanks.
Yeah, I agree. Speakers is the problem. The thing we lack. We got plenty of topics. coming up with good speakers, and fortunately we have one now for November, so we're really looking just to fill December. So if somebody wants to talk about VMware, that'd be great, or hypervisors in general. You know, if they want to talk VMware, VirtualBox, I don't know, what are the others? There's a bunch of them.
There's QEMU. I think KVM might also fit in that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's Beehive.
Yeah, and there's a boatload of them. Just a quick reminder, everyone, that we do have a comment card link. So if you would fill that out, that would be amazing. Thank you so much, Justin, for this presentation.
That was great.
Yeah,
excellent.
Thank you for having me. I hope I didn't rattle too fast. I was not sure how to time this, and it was longer than I expected. But yeah, well, please give me your feedback. I'd love to hear it. I know I'm not the greatest professional speaker, but
for anybody interested in speaking,